Give us a little, if it's possible, to do a little thumbnail on your own experience and what your discoveries were.
Prior to realizing the frequency of abduction events, I had 2 or 3 standout incidents that always troubled me. I had an experience when I was 16 years old where I had an overpowering urge on the 20th of July 1972 to, on a Saturday, 2 days hence, to go somewhere. I just thought, what am I doing here? I just looked around and thought, I've got to be here for some reason. And the next thing I knew, there was blue and indigo flashing lights all around me, and a whoom, 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 whoom kind of noise, and a buzzing noise in my ears, and a voice which seemed to be behind me, but it could have been anywhere because it was going on in my head. It said in my head, you're not going to remember any of this. When I looked at my watch, a second later, it was 8:15. And now 2 hours and 15 minutes just gone, just like that. I looked out the window, I saw a great big flying saucer. It was like it was in another dimension almost, like it wasn't part of this. It's very hard to describe it. And I didn't connect all these things up. I just thought, this is all very strange. What's going on?
Talk a little bit before we get into our conversation about some of the problems you had in publishing this book. In your heart of hearts, what do you think was going on? Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Welcome, everyone, to Higher Journeys. I am your host, Alexis Brooks, and I'm so glad to be back with you for the first long-form guest show that we've done since my sojourn out to contact in the desert, which was fabulous. What we're talking about here today is quite relevant to what I spoke about in my presentation at Contact in the Desert, where I covered what we call the intergenerational contact phenomenon at great length. And my guest today, Mr. Steve Aspin, who I'm going to put on the stage right now. I want to say publicly, thank you, Mr. Aspin, for being an integral part of the research that I did for this presentation at Contact in the Desert. You have given me and many that saw the presentation invaluable insight into something. Intergenerational contact, you guys. We're talking about something that I even thought was not necessarily a one-off, but certainly not as common, as ubiquitous as I quickly learned after doing the research for this talk. So let me formally welcome you for the first time to Higher Journeys, Mr. Steve Aspin, UFO researcher and experiencer extraordinaire. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Thank you.
We're going to make some connections today, Mr. Aspin, because I want to talk a lot about the intergenerational component. I'm calling it a component. I think it may be really at the top of the heap when it comes to what Linda Moulton Howe calls the abduction syndrome, the abduction phenomenon. But I want to first bring in a book that you wrote that was the impetus for my learning about your work, and that's Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. Now, I'm going to tell you guys, this book is chock full of insights, and it's edgy, I would say. Edgy in that Steve got to the heart of the matter to the best of his ability with extraordinary research when it comes to the why of the abduction phenomenon, to what extent it plays a role in our lives, and all sorts of things that maybe some people, Steve, didn't want you to talk about. And I'm making that sort of a lead in for you to talk a little bit before we get into our conversation about some of the problems you had in publishing this book. Would you be able to give us a summary of what the heck happened and why you think it happened?
I wrote the book between January and the beginning of May in 2022, and I published it in September of that year, and it sold very well for about 6 months, and I did lots of promotion and lots of podcast interviews and some public presentations and so forth. And then on the 31st of March 2023, when the book had been on the markets just about 6 months, my Amazon account was suddenly and catastrophically just closed, taken offline. And I was told that I, as an author, would have no access to it, and this book was going to be withdrawn from sale. And the reason given was that at the Amazon organization, I'll say, I use the organization because I didn't interface with anybody by name during this entire process, alleged that I was associated with different accounts. If you publish with Kindle Direct Publishing, you have an Amazon account, you have a Kindle account, and something to do with esoteric to do with one of the rules was that owners of these accounts, account holders, are not allowed to have dual accounts. I never had a dual account, and I never had anything to do with anyone who had one. And it was, I published with KDP solely because the editor I employed, who normally works for Oxford University Press, that was the only publishing channel, publishing medium that he has intimate knowledge of, and with the rest he doesn't normally go all the way to publishing. He just does editing, copy editing, and proofreading. So he knew how to set the book up on Amazon, to typeset it on KDP, and that's why I ended up with a KDP account. Anyway, the book disappeared online, and I tried to get answers out of Amazon about this. Whitley Strieber, as an example, and a number of other people told me that I should sue them for damages. And the problem I had was that KDP is based in Seattle, Washington, and I live in the UK, and there was a jurisdiction issue, and there was other barriers to doing that. So I didn't rule it out, but I just thought the overwhelming priority was to get the book back on the market. So I found a new publisher and had to start from scratch with this new publisher. Fortunately, I had the manuscript all typeset. I made some minor changes to it and released it as a second edition. Excuse me.
We're also going to make sure we put a copy on the screen so you can see it. Awesome.
As a second edition with Grosvenor House Publishing, which is a British company based in a suburb of London. Interestingly, they're about 400 meters from where I used to live for 25 years. But when I lived there, I had no intention of publishing a book, and I didn't even know they were there, just down the road. That's where they are. And it was released in hardback, paperback, and ebook in a second edition in August 23, which is just coming up to 2 years, since which time it's continued to sell and continues to be very successful. I was dubious that the Amazon organization would take on the book as published by Grosvenor House. And I was assured by the publisher that they would do that, and they would see to it that they did that. And sure enough, they stopped it, and they've been selling it like hotcakes. It was number one. The second edition was number one Amazon bestseller for a few weeks, and now obviously the sales have gone down now, because that's what happens with publishing. The book is now theoretically almost 3 years old since it was first published. So, but it's stopped by Amazon. It is stopped by all the international Amazon outlets, not just Amazon.com and Amazon.uk, but everywhere.
Right.
So that's the story in brief. I never got to the bottom of why it was removed, but the reason I was given doesn't make any sense, and I was never given any details, and they refused to give any details about this. And when you, just one more thing, when you try and contact the Amazon organization, you think you're phoning as an author, you think you're contacting the office in Seattle, but what happens is the phone rings for ages, and then somebody in Bangalore answers it. And this person doesn't speak English very well and doesn't know anything about your problem, so you have to go through the chapter and verse of it, and the case number and so forth, and they promise that somebody will call you back, and nobody ever calls. So after about a week or 10 days, you make another call and you think you might, with luck, get through to the first person you spoke to. And you get through to some completely new person in Manila or somewhere else. And they don't know anything about this either. So that's how it goes on. And you never get to communicate with anybody who understands or can explain to you or was willing to explain to you why your book is removed from the market. They can just remove it.
Right,
And
right.
that's
No,
it. Yeah.
yeah. Listen, I want to get to the heart of this because, again, this would be somewhat speculative on your part, but I want to ask you, Steve Aspin, based on what you and I talked about offline and some of the shenanigans that are going on that are not readily discussed, in your heart of hearts, what do you think was going on?
It's either someone in the security services in the United States, because Kindle Direct Publishing is a company based in Seattle, so it's under US jurisdiction, who has people or one person or many people working in the Amazon organization to check and monitor these things, who ensured that this book was, they ensured that there was something was done electronically with the algorithms, and something was proven in quotes about me being engaged in nefarious activities of having two accounts or something, or it was something other than that. Whatever is the cause, it was not what I was told by KDP, because it makes absolutely no sense, and they refuse to give me any details. They just say, we made a decision, that's it.
Do you believe, and I don't want to ask a leading question, but I'm going to go to the heart of the matter. Do you believe that it was something that you wrote in that book, an area that you covered that they didn't want to get out?
At least one thing, possibly many things, but one thing in the book that is fairly unusual in abductee testimony, or a book about the abduction phenomenon, is that I was very meticulous in documenting physical evidence for the phenomenon, which you really can't deny, because I had an experience in 2015 where my house was entered by the abducting entities, and I won't go into this whole story because the whole story is in the book in chapter 4. But as a result of that incursion, that abduction event, um, my wife found two long blonde hairs, one under the dining table on the rug, and one out on the patio just outside the glass doors into the garden in the same day, and they were identical hairs and different. Now, this neither one of us have got blonde hair. Neither one of us have got hair that length, and it took me. It's actually David Jacobs from Temple University. You may know who he is. He's
Yeah.
left the field of study now, but he's retired in Illinois. He found eventually a couple of ex-colleagues of his from the university who had started a forensic laboratory in Illinois, and they analyzed one of these hairs, and they analyzed a different hair from a different abductee who I didn't even know, who apparently was living in California, who'd found this, and she remembered how exactly during the abduction event that this had been acquired. This had ended up inside her shirt. So this company in Illinois called Microtrace LLC did a forensic analysis of these two hairs, and they discovered something very interesting. They were both from wigs, and
Huh.
the hairs were found in my house were from a costume wig made of human hair that had been bleached prior to dyeing, but they didn't. Neither hair had a hair root, and so there's no mitochondrial DNA you can get from this. The hair from the abductee in California, which was analysed during the same um, investigative session, was from a polypropylene wig, again a costume wig, and that was dyed very dark brown. So that was a wig as well, but it wasn't a human hair. So they were obviously from completely different origins, from two completely different abductees living 5,000 miles apart who never met each other and didn't know each other. And both abductees and these hairs have been recovered at different times from these two events. And they were both from wigs. Now, Wickley Street was staying here with us in Lincolnshire last September. And one of the things that came to this conversation was these hairs. And he asked, what is it about hybrids and wigs? Because he knew about it and he'd come across it. And I never knew anything about hybrids and wigs prior to this, finding these in my house. So that's very physical, hard evidence, a physical artifact with a scientific forensic report. Also, I quote a report from a dermatology clinic in Manhattan who biopsied a scoop mark scar I had on the shoulder, behind the shoulder. And the report from that in laboratory investigation is also published in Out of Time. So, and there's two other things that we maybe not have time to go into everything, but one is an implant recovered, analyzed by neutron star nanotechnology in California. So I've put a lot of hard science in it and linked it directly to the incontrovertibly to the abduction phenomenon. And I think this may have been the trigger, because it's something you can't say, oh, it's these people, it's sleep paralysis. No, it's not sleep paralysis. When you find hairs that don't belong to you or anybody in your family in your house after an abduction event, and they're analyzed by an accredited forensic laboratory in Illinois, and the report is there, you can't say it's sleep paralysis.
No.
And it's this level of hard scientific evidence that I think spook people. Some people, you know.
If that's the case, Steve, we have to imagine that, and I don't want to throw Amazon under the bus because we all utilize them, and there's many good things about them. However,
I still buy from them.
Sure, there are few that don't, but nonetheless, if we're putting together a little case here, if there was something suspicious about what they did to you based on the fact that there was some information in that book that they didn't want to get out, there was somebody in that organization whose business it is to see to it that certain information doesn't get out for other reasons. In other words, who are they employing? That's the question.
Well, it's being suggested to me, this is a wild speculation for which I have no evidence. It's not my idea that these alien hybrids, that are hybrids that are allegedly integrating in society, which a lot of people report interacting with, some of those people are in the organization. And they're making sure that this doesn't get out and that doesn't get out. And they're doing their very best to scupper research into this phenomenon.
That's very interesting. That's a very interesting thing.
I can only comment on that. I can't express an opinion about its veracity. It may be complete fantasy, but I suspect there might be something in it.
Well, what I'm reminded of when you say that, I mean, again, all of this is speculative, but we've got to do some dot connecting here. And one of the things that it reminds me of is the now late retired Major Robert Dean, who said quite unequivocally that they are walking in the halls of the Pentagon. They are walking in the halls of the Pentagon, and to what extent do they
go the ponytail? Yeah, Robert Dean.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. He had some incredible revelations, and again, speculative, but to the extent that we need to know, I think it's important to have these sorts of discussions. Well, we have a lot to get to, and we're literally, guys, just scratching the surface. But one of the things I really want to have you spend a little bit of time on before we get into the broader discussion of intergenerational abductions is your own personal touch point into this. There is a personal touch point, and perhaps it was the impetus for your writing this book. Give us a little, if it's possible to do a little thumbnail on your own experience and what your discoveries were in this whole sort of unfurling of your own encounters.
Well, prior to realizing the frequency of abduction events, I had two or three standout incidents that always troubled me, and there's very little dialogue or published material in the UK or outside the United States, actually, anywhere about the alien abduction phenomenon, because all the big researchers like John Mack and so forth have been American, and very few people on this side of the pond are known for studying the subject in any meaningful way. So there was nothing in the public domain. I had read Whitley Strieber's book Communion in 1987 when it was first published, because he went on a global publicity media tour and was interviewed on primetime chat shows and so forth. So everybody read it, and it was a very big seller, and it justifiably. So I knew that about the abduction phenomenon, or what he claimed his experiences were. And I knew about the Hill case and the Villas-Boas case, and a very small number of others, but I didn't really think it applied to me. And, I just, you have this strange dichotomy that you can't admit to something when you don't want it to be true. Do you know that? If you don't want it to be true, you just pretend it's not true. It's got to be something else. I had an experience when I was 16 years old where I had an overpowering urge on the 20th of July 1972 on a Saturday, this was on a Thursday evening, on a Saturday, 2 days hence, to go somewhere. I said, I've got to get up early and go somewhere. And it was a very powerful compulsion. And it's something that I just didn't question. It's very strange. I just didn't question it. I just thought, I've just got to do that. So I got up very early on Saturday morning, which was the only day I didn't go to work, because I was working in a holiday job between school and college. And I got up at very early in the morning and cycled 8 miles to this job. And the only day I didn't work was Saturday. And so on this Saturday morning, I got up at the usual time, rather than lying in, and found myself walking a mile or so to a fairly deserted area, where some part-built houses were being built, so being constructed. Nobody lived there yet, because none of them were finished and nobody had moved in. And this was in a place which wasn't near any inhabited dwellings, so it was kind of a greenfield site, and it was full of bricks and part-built houses with walls and roof timbers and no roofs and so forth, and no doors. And I just thought, what am I doing here? I just looked around and thought, I've got to be here for some reason. And the next thing I knew, this was 6 o'clock in the morning when I was at this place. And the next thing I knew, there was blue and indigo flashing lights all around me, and a woom, 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 woom kind of noise, and a buzzing noise in my ears, and a voice which seemed to be behind me, but it could have been anywhere because it was going on in my head, said in my head, "You're not going to remember any of this. You're just going to forget it all." So that's just a statement of fact. It wasn't an instruction. You're not going to remember, like a hypnosis thing. It's just somebody which tells you, "Oh, you're not going to remember it."
But you did remember.
Yeah, well, I remember
you're telling it.
I didn't remember the details of the missing time, because when I looked at my watch a second later, it was 8:15. And now 2 hours and 15 minutes are just gone, just like that. So I was there at 6 o'clock, and the next thing, it was 8:15, and all I remember was these pulsating blue and amber and indigo coloured lights. I looked out the window. The aperture in the wall where a window was said to be fitted was no window frame yet, because the house wasn't properly constructed. And through this aperture, this rectangular aperture where a window was planned to be fitted, I saw a great big flying saucer in the sky.
Hmm.
And it was kind of at an angle like that, and it was moving from my left to my right and slightly climbing. It was like it was in another dimension almost, like it wasn't part of this. It's very hard to describe it. And I thought, what's that doing there? And I didn't connect all these things up. I just thought, this is all very strange. What's going on? And suddenly, all the blue flashing lights were gone. The noise in my ears were gone. The UFO was gone. And I just found myself standing there and saying, right, it's time to go home now. And as I was walking home, I felt this cheek was kind of wet and moist and very uncomfortable. And when I got home, I looked in the bathroom mirror, and there's a precisely circular burn mark below the eye socket on the left cheek, which took 3 months to heal up. And it turned, it followed, it scabbed over, and the scab came off slowly, and eventually my face looked normal again. But it took 3 months, and I have no idea what that was. I had no idea where I got it from, and I didn't know what to say to people if they asked about it, because I would say, I woke up with it, or this thing happened in a building site, and I have no idea what was going on. In 1972, in the northwest of England, you couldn't talk about alien abductions because nobody would have a clue what you were talking about. It literally wasn't an expression that anybody had heard. And it wasn't in anybody's consciousness at all.
It was an expression that no one had, they hadn't heard anything about it, or were they,
people who read later, very small proportional number of the population were kind of interested in UFO subjects, and they bought Flying Saucer Review, which I later came to. I didn't have it. I never saw it. I didn't know it existed. But I came later to appreciate that it was internationally respected, and a lot of copies were sold in the United States and so forth. And people who are maybe 1 in 200 people, or 1% of people in the population might have read this thing. And these abduction cases, like the Hill case, certainly by 1972, and maybe a couple of others, like maybe the Andreasen case, maybe the Vilas Boas case from Brazil, would have been written up in Flying Saucer Review and had a paragraph each, because it was always considered to be so improbable and so unlikely and so outrageous that nobody really took it seriously and knew what to do with it. Yeah.
I mean, we're still dealing with this sort of, I'm going to call it dissonance, and maybe even what you could call a cultural amnesia, Steve, that is going on. I want to pause on that for a minute, because I want to get your thoughts on this. This is something that I would still consider to be a sort of cultural amnesia, and you have to ask the question, and particularly for the people that are in such vehement denial still about the legitimacy of this phenomenon, you have to wonder if this too is a part of the shutdown. I mean, you could look at it as, were we as the masses given the proverbial blue pill, and we swallowed it. And when I say we, obviously most of the people watching this show didn't. But do you think that too may be indicative of the keeping this quiet, just like they were perhaps trying to keep your book quiet?
It absolutely suits the agenda of the abductors, whatever it is, because one thing you can say with certainty about the abduction phenomenon is they obviously don't want to know what they're doing, whatever it is. They don't want people to remember. They don't want any public attention brought to it. They don't want abductees walking around remembering what happened to them the previous night. They don't want it known about as much as possible. They obviously can't prevent some of it leaking out. There's a small number of people in the population have this syndrome that they remember every single day of their lives. They remember, if you ask for somebody, one of these people, what were you doing on May the 2nd, 1976, and they'll just remember, they say, oh,
Yeah.
that was a Wednesday, I was in this place and I did that, and I remember. Their memory is that way, and it's got an acronym. Do you know that? Do you know about this?
I've heard of that before. I
Yeah.
don't know what it's called offhand, but I've heard of that. Very few people have.
There was a TV show, American TV show called Taxi, that was
Yes.
televised about 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And the woman who played Carla, the actress who played Carla, had this facility. She was one of these people with completely intact autobiographical memory from every day of her life. So you could say, yeah, do you remember? And people remember Christmas and they remember their birthdays. But if I said, I don't know when your birthday is, Alexis, but if I said, what were you doing on the 8th of September, 1986? Can you tell me? These people
I'd have to think about it. I could probably, when you mention the year, I can probably. It's nothing like that, obviously.
Would you know what day of the week it was?
No, absolutely not.
These people can remember that. Now, this very tiny group of people in the population have extremely specific autobiographical memory. They never forget their abductions. They always remember them. Because the abductors can't bury it in the long-term memory, because the long-term memory is always accessible to these people.
That's interesting. Well, let me ask you, in your research, did you run across any specific individuals that were both abductees and had this incredible autobiographical?
I'd love to meet one, but they're
Okay.
so rare.
What percentage of the population do they speculate it has this sort of phenomenon?
It's very tiny. It's maybe as small as 1 in a million. At least it's less than 1 in 100,000.
Yeah.
So the chances that you meet any one of these people in a lifetime is quite low. But they are out there. There's a few in every population, a handful in every population. And it's a widely recognized psychological condition. It's a widely recognized thing in psychology that these people do exist, but they're very unusual.
Right.
I'm not sure anybody understands what mechanism it is in the brain that enables this. But
well, I mean, it's like looking at right now, of course, with the subject around telepathy and the telepathy tapes, moreover, and the individuals that are the subject of that, which are primarily non-speaking autistic individuals, and some of the sort of savant type skills or assets that they possess, it kind of falls in that category. I mean, these are just make head scratching abilities. So who's to say why? But what you're saying is that what you've been able to find out of those types of individuals who are also abductees is that their abduction experience does remain intact. Hey everyone. Right after this episode, I want you to join us for the after show, where Steve and I are going to be talking about something I didn't want to cover in this main episode. We're going to discuss a theory about whether abductees are being reprogrammed for a future they're not meant to remember until it's time. Abductees may be part of a long game behavioral conditioning plan where memories are altered, beliefs are implanted, and emotional responses are manipulated, all for a future role they're not aware of. We're going to discuss the psychological control aspect of abductions, which often gets overlooked. We'll discuss whether abductees are being prepared to assist with or submit to a planetary transition. What does Steve think about walk-ins, replacements, or triggered roles abductees may be unaware of, and whether some humans may already be under non-human influence? All of this is coming up in our after show segment. We're going in a little bit deeper than we normally do, so don't miss it. Come on over, watch this episode, plus over 100 more. I think we're at close to 150 episodes of after shows. You can do this by joining our Patreon community for as little as $5 per month, where you not only get this great content, but also you'll be supporting the work of Higher Journeys, and that means everything to us. So come join us.
Yes, what the abductors do is they bury the experience in the long-term memory, which is why people have missing time. All abductees always talk about this. That you find a couple will be in a car and they'll say, "Oh, we saw this bright light in the sky and we slowed down and stopped at the side of the road to get a better look at it." They would say to get a better look at it or to focus on it. And suddenly, and it was 7 o'clock in the evening, and the sun was still up because it was a summer or springtime. And suddenly, it's dark and it's 9:15,
Mm-hmm.
and they have instant. It's seamless. The time is seamless. There's no memory of anything in between. It's 7 o'clock and now it's 9:15.
Sure.
And this missing time phenomenon is a major feature that
Absolutely.
abductees describe, and how it seems the abductors engineer that is that they look into your eyeball from a very close range when they've got you on the table in the abduction events. They look into the eye, and often one of these tour grays will twist his head round and this way and that way until they can focus on your lock into your optic nerve, and then they can use that as an access point into the brain. They've got the incredibly sophisticated, genetically engineered or genetically developed abilities, neurological abilities over humans. They can paralyze you so that you can't move, and you can't kick them, and you can't punch at them, and you can't do anything. And they can allow you to move around during the abduction slowly, walking here and there or lying down slowly. But you can only move those muscles that are required for that activity. And this mind scan procedure has been talked about for years and years. Not everybody remembers it, but it seems that people who do develop a very successful memory recall, because you can develop it, and it's hard work, but you can develop it over time, and you don't need hypnosis for it. It's something you do is remembering stuff, and you've got to learn how to access the long-term memory. They can't, if you can't access the long-term memory, the abduction event is basically buried in that part of the memory in the brain where if something happened to you when you were age 3 and you're now 50, and you won't remember that particular incident it's buried that deep in your memory, and they know how to do this. They know how to engineer this. It's this neurological ability for them to contain human neurology, for control human neurology, that makes the abduction program possible, not just successful, possible. Because if it works,
okay,
everybody remember everything.
right. I want to bring in an angle, if I may, Steve, just to kind of rock the boat just a little bit in terms of, we think of these things like missing time, mind wipe, screen memory, which is a very, very common aspect to this phenomenon. And I always ask the question, when we tend to assume that it's the beings that are able, with their own advancements, to be able to do this to us. But I have to ask the question, in some cases, could our own brains be presenting the screen to protect us? Could our own brains at times be mind wiping or pushing back to a part of the brain where it can stay in the recesses, to protect us, essentially? So, and that begs a larger question, of course, as to what extent may we be engineered by the beings so that they're able even to not develop the brain, but to set the brain to be able to do that, if that makes any sense. In other words, could we have skin in the game as well as to some of these seemingly anomalies of mind wiping and screen memory? Have you ever thought about that?
I have thought about it. It's possible, but I think that the majority of my experiences have been engineered by the abductors. Because
Okay.
I mean, I'll give you an example. In 2006, I went on a business trip to Sardinia, and I took my girlfriend with me at the time, and we were supposed to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to drive one of our business colleagues to the local airport because we had a rental car, and in order for him to fly back to Amsterdam because he was a Dutch guy, a business colleague of mine, business partner. And I woke up at 7:30, which is half an hour after the time we'd agreed to meet and to depart. And I was lying on top of the bedclothes, sitting upright with my back upright against the headboard. And in this room were two small grey aliens. And they were little guys, not much taller than about 3 feet in height. And they were standing there. And between the two grey aliens was my father. And it was absolutely in glorious technicolor, just like the aliens were. It looked as real and as physical as the furniture in the room. And he said to me, "It's time to go, Steve," which I later discovered is what they always say when they're taking you back. And for a year, until maybe 2 years, until I got used to the idea that the abduction program might be happening to me, I thought of this experience as something otherworldly, because my dad had died in 2003, so 3 years prior to this incident in Sardinia. And I just thought, he's come back to visit, to tell me he's okay. And but who were those really ugly looking, skinny looking people with him? Are they to where he now is, in the afterlife? Are they there too? Who the hell were they? And I couldn't make any sense of this.
You didn't have any reference that they were greys at the time, is what you're saying?
Not at the time, no.
Okay.
None. I'd seen Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with the spider aliens there. And I knew about them in popular fiction because the internet was starting to gain some traction in the world at the time. But I'd really very little interest in it. You won't believe this, but I have very little interest in the subjects prior to recognizing that I was actually this abduction program.
Not uncommon. Not uncommon.
Yeah, it was what's happening to me. It was what explained all the symptoms and all the weirdness and every single thing that happened.
Wow.
And a wide variety of different things. And I know that, come back to the screen memories, these two aliens, or I think there's a third one between them. I think there were three of them. And the middle one projected something in my mind that they obviously knew what my father looked like, because they got mental imagery from my mind at some point, maybe on that particular occasion, but maybe previously. They projected this into my mind to make me think that it was a spiritual visitation from my dad. And there's no way, I don't think, I would come up with that and created two grey aliens, one in either side of him in a Sardinia hotel room. I don't think that's anything other than the aliens putting that in my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That screen memory in my mind.
Yeah. There's so many variations.
Because the memory I had, for long after that was my dad. He came back to me. I'm amazed that he would do that. But I know it was him because he looked like him and sounded like him, and he was there. And he wasn't, in fact.
How old did he look when you saw him, Steve? How old did he look? He looked
a bit younger than when he died, but he was an adult. Yeah, he looks a bit.
That's typically, that's an interesting thing. Again, we can't say for sure, but in terms of the anecdotes that we've all heard as researchers, when people say that they've had some form of a visitation, the relative or loved one will invariably look younger. And that has been looked at as a hallmark for an authentic visitation. Still, we can't say for sure, but I find that interesting. Could they know, could the beings themselves know that this is something that we're used to seeing when we do see our loved ones, that they come across younger? So many questions. Here's what I want to do, because the time is just ticking by and you've got so many. I mean, your book, you guys, I'm going to put a screenshot of the book again, and of course we'll have a link. It's chock full of all of this stuff, but this is what I want to get to, Steve. We have to go there. I want to transition even more, go a bit deeper into the intergenerational link. This was the impetus for you and I coming together.
Yeah,
You were gracious enough to give me some great information for my own research for my presentation. Your intergenerational or familial link. Tell us very briefly, and then I want to get into your philosophy around and your theory around how common or uncommon that may be. Tell us your story and what you learned about your own family connection.
well, when I was 10 years old in 1960, maybe 11, in 1967, thereabouts, I used to, throughout my childhood, I had these weird experiences, which I now recognize as abduction experiences, but I thought they were something to do with the fairies, the nature spirits, something to do with I had a feeling there was something ancestral about them, but I didn't connect them in any way at all with extraterrestrial life forms or the UFO phenomenon. I had no connection with that at all. And I knew about, you see Lost in Space on the TV as a kid, and you see a spaceship that's round and saucer shaped, and you, there was the day the Earth stood still in 1951, a cinematic movie in 1951, and so I knew about flying saucers in an abstract sense, and they appeared in comic books and so forth. But I had no connection between that popular culture, those popular culture things, and these experiences I had at night, which weren't related to the UFOs, so far as I could tell. I never even gave it a thought that they might be. But I used to find myself in this place with these beings, and they talked to me in my mind and told me they wouldn't hurt me, and they wouldn't take long and so forth, which is the stuff they would say. And I asked one of them very respectfully at one time, again mentally, I mustn't have been speaking with my vocal cords. I said, "Why are you doing this to me? Why am I singled out for this particular treatment? I don't think all my school friends go through with this, but I don't think I can be the only one, the only person on earth that goes through this. So what's going on? Can you please help me out with this? Can you please tell me basically what I'm doing here with you people?" And he said, "Oh, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother, and you're next in the line." And he just turned around and carried on with what he was doing. And for some reason, this particular conversation stayed with me. I mean, you don't think about it all the time. It just goes deep down. You kind of forget it, but it's always there in your memory. Never completely eradicated the memory. And when I realized that the abduction phenomenon explained everything that had been going on with me for my life, I saw one day I remembered this conversation with this entity. I remember where I was taken from, which room in the house I was taken from, where we lived at the time. I remembered what was on the walls, and I remembered where the window was, and they used to take me through across a field at the back. And I thought, my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandmother. I thought, yeah, my mum was really into this weird stuff. I think she might have been. I think that might be accurate about her. And my grandmother, I remember asking her the year after, because she died when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
I remember asking her about these weird events that happened at night. These people that come and you find yourself with them, and you feel paralyzed and you feel heavy and you can't move. And she said, "Oh, Stevie, they're just the pixies. They'll always bring you back." So she knew about this thing, but she didn't know, as I didn't know, had anything to do with extraterrestrials or the UFO phenomenon at all. She had nothing connected at all.
No
She
reference
just
point.
thought they were pixies, folk tales, fairies, and so forth. And so she knew about it. She knew she had these weird things in her life, and she just thought I had the impression that she just thought that when a child asks about this, you explain to them that it's just the pixies. And if they don't ask, you don't say anything.
Right.
And a year later, she died. So I had these connections to my mother and my grandmother, and my great grandmother I didn't know as well, but I did know her until I was 6. She died in 1962 when I was 6, and I didn't really have any connection with this weird stuff with her at all. But when this entity said to me, it was because of your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother, that made absolute complete sense to me now. When I started studying the abduction phenomenon, because all the researchers like John Mack, Dr. John Mack, David Jacobs, Yvonne Smith, Bud Hopkins, all these people who researched it in some detail and had been fairly persistent and diligent, they'd all arrived at the conclusion that it's an intergenerational thing.
Mm. This was one of the things, Steve, that I was a bit surprised about when I started getting into my research. I mean, we know it's talked about quite often, but I mean, your thesis, if I'm not mistaken, is essentially that, in fact, I'm going to quote you. You say, the only certainty is that they, the abductors, do follow genetic family lines and do not abduct those who are born with neither parent in the program.
Yeah.
This is with few exceptions. You go on to say, if you're a regular abductee, it's almost certain, so far as we know, that you're described from an origin abductee, probably chosen sometime during the 1890s. That's obviously a very specific thesis that you arrived at. I would love to know, even above and beyond some of the great work of John Mack and Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and my friend Yvonne Smith, how you decided that this is most likely the case.
What the duration of the abduction program? You mean
The fact that, almost without any exception, if you are a contactee, you come from a lineage of contactees with very, very few exceptions.
Yeah, because everybody I'd talked to, all the researchers I'd been to see and interview and got to know, and many of the abductees, virtually all the abductees I talked to, told me that this is what like it is. That's what happens. And there's occasionally instances like, do you know the Allagash abduction case?
Yes, of course, I'm familiar with that.
So there were 4 guys, art students, who went to Maine for a wilderness holiday, and they were camping out, and they went out in a canoe to do some fishing, and they were all abducted. 2 of these guys were twin brothers. That's Jim and Jack Wiener, and another one, a third one, was probably an abductee also, which is probably why the abduction took place. The 4th guy was called Chuck Rack. I think Charlie Foltz was the other abductee. 4th guy was called Chuck Rack, and Rack, when he eventually had recovery hypnosis, which was like years later that they decided they couldn't live with these troublesome memories, and this whole incident that happened on this remote part of Maine. They undertook regressive hypnosis, and Chuck Rack remembered that for the whole time he was abducted, he was taken aboard, he sat there and watched the other 3 undergo procedures, and he was just immobilized and wasn't subject to any procedure. I think he may have had a couple of minor things, may have even had a sperm sample taken, maybe not even that, because male abductees almost always have sperm samples taken during their abduction events. That's a whole different area of investigation. But the other 3 went through they were naked, and they had all the clothes removed. They were put through various different things, either standing up and being screened, or lying down, or being manipulated by the greys. And Rack just sat there on a bench and watched it all, and wasn't interfered with at all. And then he was put back with the other 3. So he was the only one who was almost certainly not in the abduction program, and the other three almost certainly were in the abduction program.
Why do you
So
think they
that's
took him? Why do you think they brought?
because he was in the canoe, and they wouldn't want they preferred to have him on board um, than left in the canoe alone for all sorts of reasons. Because he would have noticed if they'd left him in the canoe alone. I imagine that he would have noticed that the other three were missing for 2 or 3 hours.
Well, that could be, but I mean, there's so many variations, Steve, of these
Yeah,
cases. There are cases
but
where,
you know,
uh,
it's factual that Rec had that separate, different experience to the
right,
other three.
right. But I'm comparing this to instances where, let's say, a husband and wife are in bed and the husband will be abducted and the wife will be made to be put out. So she doesn't even notice that he's
Yeah,
gone for a
yeah,
period of time.
yeah,
So you could argue that if they wanted to, they could just mind wipe the third person. So it's just so interesting. And this, again, we can only speculate.
yeah.
This case, the Allagash case happened in Maine, right?
Yes.
And there were
In,
twins involved. There were
in
twins.
1975 or 76. I
Okay,
think so.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Hewins twins, also from Maine. Audrey, and I can't remember her sister's name, who I actually had the pleasure of meeting quite a few years back, both experiencers. In fact, Preston Dennett has written a great deal about twins having abduction experiences together, and
It's likely they would. It's
yeah.
likely they would. Yeah.
But interestingly, both were from Maine.
Yeah.
I want to touch on. We have a couple more things to get through before we go on to the after show. But I also want to touch on this idea of, you and I'm not quite sure yet whether we share this theory or we're somewhat in opposition about the number of people that may be, I say loosely, experiencers. And
Yeah.
again, you could argue, are all experiencers abductees? Were all abductees are experiencers? Let's talk about your surmise that you're saying about only 2 to 3% of the population may be abductees themselves, but you also say that you go through an incredible breakdown of the generational, perhaps 7 generations going back to
Yeah.
the late 1800s, and if you do that calculation, a lot more people are connected, may not be direct abductees, but are connected to the phenomenon just by virtue of the generations that have been involved. It can get a little muddy there and trying to understand that. Let me just put this out there. This is important. I have spoken a great deal, Steve, about the idea or the question: could most of this planet, at some level, be an experiencer? I don't use the term abductee, I use experiencer, but be unconscious of it. And I did a very lengthy presentation on this actually at Contact in the Desert and in Australia. Not saying I can prove it, but there's some clues that tell me that a heck of a lot more people may be having experiences that are completely unaware of it. I want to juxtapose those two. Give me your thoughts on where you're coming from here.
Well, Terry Lovelace, you know Terry, don't you?
Very well, yes.
If you've ever talked to him about this, he thinks that about 10% of the population, global population, are abductees. I think the data, it's in the ballpark, but I think the data, um, like the Roper poll and other surveys that have been done, and anecdotally, the people that you meet, and I think it's probably between 1 in 20 and 1 in 50 of the population is an abductee.
Okay, so we're
That's
closer.
yeah, and there's a lot of data behind me saying that is explained in a chapter in Out of Time. It's
Mhm.
very complicated to go into. I think we're running short on time, so we can go into that some other time. But there's a lot of data about that, and I think it's about 1 in 50,
Oh,
at least 1 in 50, and possibly as many as 1 in 20,
right.
somewhere in between. And I think
Again,
between the generations, because the world's population changes, and people live and die and have different lifespans and so forth, it probably changes a little bit, from one generation to the next with population shifts and illnesses and so forth. I don't know.
I touched on this idea, and I've said this before, and correct me if you feel I'm wrong, that where all abductees are contactees, that doesn't necessarily mean that all contactees have been abducted. because
Yeah,
they're framed somewhat differently. We think
yeah,
traditionally as an abduction is something that's done against our will, where
yeah,
other people describe they're having contact and it's either mutually agreed upon or it's something that's more of a communion than an invasion. What are your thoughts on that? Abduction, or if you have contact, are they all abductions, or
Well,
or not?
if we're interacting, although we have more than one species interacting with us, if we have four, as Ed Davis says, um, I think his name is Ed. Is it? Anyway, Davis, um, Dr. Davis,
Yeah.
and he claimed that we have at least four species interacting with us, different origins.
Mm.
Um, Obviously, the other three have some interaction with us and may not be the same as the abducting entities, which are running a very substantial and serious and deeply thought out program. Um, but the other three, there might be more than three, there might be 10, there might be 20. And there might be people who just come here once and go and have a look around and leave, There's a
Right.
billion exoplanets in the Milky Way galaxy alone. So,
Absolutely.
how
Yeah.
much time are you going to spend in one place
Right.
unless you've business there, how much
Right.
time? So
Mm.
I don't really know. I just can't answer that question now. I hesitate to speculate about it because it's very difficult to have any data on it.
Have you seen any other entities in your sojourns other than the graves?
Yeah, yeah.
What do they look like for whatever it's
Uh,
worth?
like big praying mantises, about 7 feet tall, very
Yeah.
skinny. Yeah, with eyes very similar to the grey aliens, the almond-shaped eyes they have,
Mhm.
and they're extremely strong mentally. They when one one's in the room and is thinking at you, that's all. It completely fills your mind. You can't. There's no way you can concentrate on anything else. It
Right.
has your full attention. And those things you don't come across. I don't come across very often. I could probably count on
But you
two
have.
or three. Oh yes, yeah, 2 or 3 times I have, but I know remember. And the rest of the time I don't remember ever interacting with one. Some people interact with them, um, not on in their environment on a UFO. Um, they claim that that's one female abductee in Germany told me that she had one visit in when she was driving a car and she had to stop and it was right there in the front of the car and it kind of came through the windscreen,
Mm.
which is pretty, obviously not on board a UFO. It's just right there, and she described its physical characteristics as very similar to those that I remember. Very tall, very skinny. The mantis. Why should entities from a different ecosystem or a different planetary ecology end up looking like praying mantises? That's another question to
Rabbit
ponder.
hole. Rabbit hole
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Because they just look like Earth, terrestrial praying mantises, but like 100 times bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've
I've
got these powerful brains. But they do
yeah.
look like them, and there's everybody says that. So
Oh, absolutely. I think I've seen them myself,
yeah,
actually,
really,
and
really.
yeah, I have, and a lot of people talk about, and most of the people that I've talked to that feel that they've had encounters with them, put them in sort of a benevolent category. Certainly not malevolent. So we don't know, but
Mm.
I've not heard that I can remember of any experiencers talking about an intrusive sort of or frightening experience with them.
Can I just say they believe what they're doing is to our benefits, and they believe they're being very benevolent to us, and they
Ah,
believe they're doing us a big favor. Then that may not be the way some humans perceive them, but
mm,
that's what they believe they're doing.
good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to bring up so many things. My gosh, your book drives a reader toward a very specific conclusion. As a matter of fact, it's brought up in the forward, and I can't think of the gentleman that wrote the forward. Very good, who's an
Dom Dom
academic.
Dom Dundary is he's a
Yes,
retired psychology professor from McGill University in
absolutely.
Canada. Yes.
Absolutely. He's got lots of letters behind him. But
Yeah.
he says that you're really driving when you think about the title of the book, Out of Time, when it comes to claiming or reclaiming our own sovereignty as a species, that you feel that non-human intelligence may be preparing to dominate the planet, including managing us as a species. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Is
yeah.
that where the title came from?
Yes, it is one of the meanings of the title, probably the main one. I think that's possible. I've changed my view a little in the past couple of years, moderated it a little bit, because I've become more of a fence sitter. But I do think that a strong argument can be made for that. Basically, the enormous amount of resources they're investing in this abduction program, the enormous amount of time they give it, and the generations that they're going through, they're obviously engaged in something extremely serious, and for which they're paying a heavy price in time and resources.
Right.
And so I just think if they're doing anything short of that, what the hell are they doing?
What are they
I,
doing? And
so
who else knows about it? And here's the thing that occurred to me. Obviously, that's a very sobering, conclusion to come to. Yet there could be some truth to it, and it makes me think of, that would be a threat. I would consider that to be a threat. And then when you juxtapose that with the way our governments, to the extent that they're speaking at all, are framing the whole UAP discussion around a threat narrative, although they're not saying that would be the threat, you have to wonder, how much do they know if that were the case? They meaning those in our government and alphabet
yeah,
agencies that are involved. Do you
yeah.
think that they may have a whiff of that, if that's a possibility? That's a big question.
I don't know. Your government is the one at the centre of the world's attention for all sorts of reasons, but particularly, with the congressional hearings. They
Yes.
had congressional hearings in the Mexican Parliament about UFO issue, in 2023, when those mummified bodies were presented from the Nazca area
Yes.
in
Yeah.
Peru to the Mexican Parliament, specifically in to congressional to parliamentary committee, not congressional parliamentary committee, looking into unidentified flying objects. But most governments worldwide don't concern themselves with it. They're waiting for the American government to make a move. I
Absolutely. Well,
think.
it seems that way. Well, we're driving towards some precipice. I've been saying that for years, but I think we're finally at getting close to the tip of that long arc. I want to bring this up. I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up, since we're going to be winding down and going next door to the after show, but I'm going to do it anyway. You said that, Steve, in 2016, you were told something somewhat chilling by a so-called you've used the term hybrid, not hybrid, but a hybrid, a communicative hybrid, um, that a virus has in the
Oh,
past and will. Now, this is important, and I got to be careful because of the venue we're on here,
yeah.
that a virus could be released coming up in the future, and this was in 2016, into the atmosphere, and how the people respond to this virus
Mm,
that happened a few years later after this, perhaps, would be a determinant as to uh, a larger hidden program. You got to talk about that. What was that all about? Could the release of a virus play a role in selecting who gets abducted?
well, you have to consider that the entity talking to me, who she looked completely human. She looked like a woman you see in a high street on a Saturday afternoon. She just looked completely human. She was talking to me in my mind, which they always talk to you telepathically. What she might mean by a virus is not necessarily medically what we would understand from the word virus. It might be the closest approximation that she could give to what this is. I'd heard previously from another abductee that this person was told that how the abduction program started 130 years ago was that they released a virus into the atmosphere, and those people who responded to it, quote, in a certain way, unquote, were chosen to be the first abductees. And people who responded to it, quote, in a different way, unquote, were not chosen. And that was the justification as to how the abductees, the origin abductees, were chosen. But the word virus was also used then. I suspect it's something electromagnetic rather than something pathogenic. And I suspect this female hybrid who was talking to me in 2016 may have meant something similar. Something that was electronic or electromagnetic rather than pathogenic, but to which some people would respond and others would respond differently. I really, it's very, very difficult to make sense of and be unequivocal about, really, because it's so many questions. Every part of that conversation's got questions attached to it. So you really don't want to make it.
That was a powerful one. That was a bit of a surprise when I read that. And well, I'm going to leave that there because, again, the venue that we're on, we could potentially go down a rabbit hole there. So many possibilities. Well, I tell you what, we've dug into some pretty serious things here in terms of what may be behind this entire program, the intergenerational component, not the least of which, if there was anything, and this is going to be the last question I ask before we go to the after show, that given all that we've talked about, that we should or could do about this situation, what would it be?
Get everybody talking about it. I mean, go public with it. You're going to have to in the end, and don't be afraid of the consequences. You know, it might be, particularly the best scientific minds in the world were applied to it openly without any stigma. And if funds and big money was made available to research into this, into what's going on, and we could have a more public dialogue about it. And that's a big ask.
It's a big ask. I think we're moving the needle in that direction, though, slowly but surely. And I think we'll have some very unexpected surprises on the horizon soon. So, yeah, and no, in no small part due to what you're contributing to all of this, Steve Aspin. So I thank you so very much for your courage, particularly with what you went through with publishing the book. Is there another book on the horizon, you think, for you?
I'm writing a second book with a professor of cellular biology in Germany.
Oh my goodness!
Who works at Harvard University. He contacted me after I presented to the EGAP organization a year and a half ago, and we've been talking since then about this other book. So it's basically based on his work on this. He's a subject area, but it's
wow.
I have a very heavy input into that. It will be in the shops by the end of this year.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm glad I asked that question. The ask and you shall receive. This is no doubt going to be an important work. My goodness. Well, I wish you Godspeed in that and safety in that endeavor, most importantly to you and your co-author. Well, listen, we're going to go next door, and guess what we're going to talk about, guys? You got to come over to the after show. You got to do it. We're going to be talking about it, connected to what we've talked about today. Are we being programmed for the unknown? Are we being acclimated to a future of which we have no idea? We're going to just kind of knock some ideas around, Steve and I, in that regard. It's going to be a little bit different of an after show. So I hope you guys will consider coming on over, joining the Patreon community over there, joining the Higher Journeys community, I should say, on Patreon. I want to thank you so much. Thank you, Steve Aspin. And we will see you next door. And we'll see you next time right here.
Thank you, Alexis. See
on Higher Journeys. Thank you. Take care. Yeah. Bye-bye.